Now, as you know, something that has well and truly changed, and we have charted it since the moment Anthony Albanese became Prime Minister, is that he went from somebody who had a special mind meld with the people of Australia, and he's now just a normal politician, one who has been caught out lying how many times, who has promised to make things better but in many ways has made them worse, has turned around and divided the country along racial grounds in the conversation in and around The Voice, a decision that of course cost at least $450 million during that referendum, when we all knew what the result would be for many months, regardless of whether you liked or disliked the outcome. We also know, of course, when it comes to petrol, that despite the fact that it keeps going up to about $2 a litre, or maybe even a little more, maybe a little less, the Goldilocks number is somewhere. But again, Anthony Albanese is in a position with $20 billion in surplus to spend $3 billion of that to reduce your petrol bills by 25 cents for the next 6 months. $6 billion of the $20 billion surplus that he currently has for 50 cents for 6 months, or 25 cents for 1 year. And of course, the cost of living, which has only ever got worse. And despite the fact that headline inflation, which has gone up for the past 2 months, is starting to head back in the wrong direction, things like food, insurance, rent, electricity are all multiples of the 5.4% when it comes to inflation. Yet, of course, the protection racket of the press gallery, who still think that it's the day after the last federal election and this is the greatest Prime Minister since sliced bread, well, they're starting to get a wake-up call. The reality is that Australians want a Prime Minister who is going to do something about cost of living, who will use the extra money that he has to cut petrol excise. A person with the political smarts to understand not to divide the country on an issue that cost $450 million, and he knew for months, because of the way that he kept that one going, not splitting the question, that ultimately it was all for naught. And of course there's the issue of him constantly being overseas. Now, the Airbus Albo tag is really starting to stick. Why? Because, of course, he made his way all the way to Washington last week, and rather than just tacking on a couple of days in London or finding some way to end up in the hemisphere that he would prefer to be in, rather than the one where he has to answer questions about domestic politics, he had to come back for a couple of days to pretend that he's in charge of everything here in Australia before he gets back on the same plane and buggers off to Beijing. Oh, but he says that he's going to be tough talking. Now, remember, of course, when there was an opportunity for the head of China and our Prime Minister to sit down for about 30 minutes in Bali? Now, remember, when there's a translator involved, you halve that time, giving you the best part of 15 minutes. If you assume that both leaders had equal time to talk, well, then the conversation went for about 8 minutes. So please don't play us for fools, Prime Minister, that in that 8 minutes, that you're going to be able to bring up everything that needs to be said face-to-face to China, when we know the reality is going to be, well, things are different, I'm not the old guy, thanks very much for interfering in the last federal election. With the economic coercion, the messages about who can and can't use WeChat, and the very people who voted multiple times for the Liberal Party suddenly voted Labor, magically in line with what the CCP wanted the message to be. But of course, none of that will come up at all. They'll be talking about trade.